Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Well, just to jump back in, the photo was called "The Theater is My Temple."
Yes.
How about you talk about, can you remember the photo?
Yes, I do remember the photo. I took it when I was in Verona in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in Europe. I was at the Cannes Film Festival with one of my films, with a short film that I did. And after the festival, I decided to take a week and visit Italy. It might have been more than a week. Maybe it was 2 weeks, because I went to Florence, Verona, Venice, and Milan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that I took that photo in Verona. It was so beautiful. And so, yes, getting back to the theater, I'm imagining the trip right now.
That's
and imagining
great.
the space and that particular venue. So yeah, the theater is my temple, because from the beginning of time, the theater existed in a religious setting in ancient Greece and Rome. And it was part of their religious festivals, these Dionysian festivals, and they would put on plays. And that's how they would describe the stories of the gods, explaining nature, explaining, our purpose and what we're doing here. And over thousands and thousands of years, whatever religion, pick any religion, but most temples have some sort of stage or altar in the center or the front.
Yep.
And it's on that stage that we discuss difficult topics. We talk about what our purpose is. We talk about what our fears are, we basically talk about our lives and how we connect to something greater than ourselves. And I think that's what the purpose of theater is.
Jen, you're so in terms of my world of training and what we call service leadership, is this notion that one huge component about you as a service leader is giving yourself to something that is bigger than yourself, right? Like that touches a deeper need. And I mean, maybe it's a cliche and it's quite common to make the connection between theater and temples or sites or the sacred. But, you had said this last time and it stayed in my head. So when you're walking in a space like this, that is clearly hundreds or 1,000+ years old, and you're like looking around going, okay, there were people like me just 1,000 years ago having moving experiences. How do you feel incorporating that space as somebody who's really learned about theater and learned about communicating story?
Any theater is a sacred space to me, just like any place of worship would be a sacred space to me, regardless of if it was my religion or somebody else's. Those are sacred spaces. And I believe the theater is also a sacred space, because we're actually able, especially today, when we live in a society that's completely polarized, and we're being forced onto one side or the other. There's something happening. There's something in the ether right now where there's no gray areas anymore, which is ridiculous because the whole world is one gray area. And I feel like the theater is a place that's almost a sanctuary where you can discuss these taboo topics that would get you canceled in real life, because you can create characters from both sides of the spectrum, and you can have these characters interact. And one of my favorite quotes of all times is from George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright. And he said that theater will always exist because society will always have the need to reflect on itself. And the theater, unlike film and television, is not mass media.
Right.
You are only catering to a very finite number of people that can fit into your theater, and your production is usually going on for a limited amount of time.
Hmm.
There are the anomalies, like, I think Agatha Christie's Mousetrap has been running over 50 years in London, but that's the exception. And even the shows on Broadway that run years at a time, compared to the number of productions that are going on a year, that's like the 1%.
Yep.
Those Broadway shows that run for years are the 1%.
Yeah.
And then there's the next tier down, which is like the 10% that, maybe run and tour and go to different places in the world. But a lot of these plays just get a 6-week run and never really go anywhere from there. And these are
Hmm.
small theaters in the East Village, or, out in North Hollywood, that don't attract these huge masses of people, but they're definitely tackling subjects that are important and that wouldn't get an opportunity to be voiced on a larger scale.
So the notion of a temple, when you go in and you're presented with, taboo subjects, as you said, or
Well, taboo today is just being on the wrong side of politics,
right, right, right.
depending on who you're talking to.
Okay. This is what happens on the podcast. Like, I'll have people over who've spent years, like their brain has been in one area, like tin welding or something. Something really that I know nothing about. And okay, I've done a bit of stage stuff, and I've thought a lot about what it's like to be on stage and to be perceived by an audience, to inhabit your head, to understand like the connection of what's the magic of theater, because connecting the word sacred and the temple and
Well, let's start off with ritual.
yeah, okay.
Okay. So when we go to a temple, there's a ritual.
Hmm.
In terms of, we know when we walk into this space, we're going to alter our behavior in a certain way. Whether you're going to a church or a temple, a mosque, a synagogue, you know, before you go in the door, you prepare yourself in a different way. You
Okay.
probably will even dress a different way to show respect, because
Sure.
you're going to connect with a higher spiritual power. So, not that we're going to theater to connect with a higher spiritual power, but there is kind of a ritual. And depending on the venue of the theater, people do tend to get a little
Yep.
dressed up. And then they come in and they sit down, and there's an etiquette that everybody follows, just like an etiquette when you go to temple.
Hmm.
Whether, in temple, it's, you stand up for certain prayers, you kneel for certain prayers, you bow your head, you go take communion. There's certain rituals that happen. And in the theater, there's definitely rituals for both the performers and the audience.
Hmm.
Even the cues of applauding, or
Yep.
standing up for a standing ovation, or everybody's silent, nobody really talks, phones have to go off. And especially, like, as soon as the lights dim, the hush comes over the
Yep.
crowd. So there are not the same rituals, but there's definitely a ritualistic, kind of format of
Hmm.
going to the theater. And definitely for the actors, there's
Right.
rituals that we do before we get on the stage, there's rituals we do to prepare. There are rituals, just with us connecting as a team before we go on. There are
Hmm.
certain, like a lot of productions, like, we'll do a power circle before we
Right.
do the play, and we have to make sure that we have time to do the power circle, because there's a little bit of superstition
Yep.
involved and things
Yep.
like that. And I really do. The plays that have endured, the theater pieces that have endured over time, are ones that offer the audience some sort of either catharsis, spiritual experience, inspiration, something that gets them out of themselves.
Sure. As just you're talking and I'm thinking and making connections. So as somebody who's been on the stage and who is doing the kind of the action of bringing life to a script or whatever it is that is meant to elicit a reaction in the receiver, the viewer, or the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you describe a moment or time where you're really conscious of a kind of a change in the room where all the ingredients were just right, that it almost felt like a mystical experience? Either you could talk about a time when you went and you were in the audience, but I think it's even more interesting to find out, have you ever been on stage where it's like you transcended the moment of
Yes. Yes. And I'm going to quote Danny DeVito, the actor.
I love it.
Because he describes it, and this is the best way I've ever heard an actor describe it. He describes it as when you're working and all of a sudden your feet lift up off the ground.
Yeah.
Because you're no longer based in the reality of like the world that we live in, but all of a sudden your feet lift off the ground and the reality of the world of the play becomes so real for you. It's like you're floating. Exactly. It becomes this kind of transcendence. And I have had a couple of experiences like that on stage. The first time, I'll talk about the first time that ever happened for me. I played a really challenging role. I was living in New York. I was 25. And at this point, like, this was like the biggest opportunity I had had in my career. And I was playing a mentally challenged girl who ends up getting raped and murdered. And the rape scene was on stage.
Oh, wow.
And I remember like just something taking over my body, and just like sounds coming out of me that I'm like, where are these things? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like the way my body was stiffening and reacting and the sounds. And it was actually interesting because the producer of the show only watched the entire play once.
Oh.
And I got, and I started noticing that he would leave after the first half of the play because we were doing the show, several shows a week for several weeks. And I remember, after that first week, I went to the director and I said, what's going on? Like, because I guess I just let this thing take over me. And it wasn't really conscious anymore. It's like you do your prep, you do your backstory, you walk yourself through these emotional, like you build these fake emotional memories, but you build them in a way that you can recall them and they help you trigger the moment on stage. And the director said, oh, yeah, he said he just can't watch you do that more than once. It's just too much. And I was like, oh, because I thought he thought I sucked. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? I'm like working so hard out there. What's going on? But that was what we were trying to achieve.
Sure, of course.
Like that torturous, like blood curdling scene. And so that was definitely one of the first times, because that was the most challenging role. It was my biggest role at that point.
Yeah.
You don't get offered everything the day you show up.
No, of course,
it takes a few years, until you actually get meatier roles or bigger parts and stuff. So that definitely was one of them. And then there was another project I was working on a few years later. And I remember, sorry, I'm just recalling this.
I can see it on your, for the listener, I can see on her face that Jen is losing herself at the moment. And I don't want to interrupt.
No, that's okay. It's okay. I just noticed I'm staring off into space and you're just like, what is she doing?
No. It's, because in my head, when that happened, I was like, we're going to need some kind of palate cleanser to go from the rape of a challenged young woman on stage to the next photo.
Yes. Yeah. So let me do, so no, but even like, there were
Please.
even times there was another production that I was working on where I was playing a love scene, and the guy who was playing my boyfriend, like in real life, he's gay.
Yeah.
And so obviously not attracted to me, like,
Sure.
but we were able to conjure this chemistry that was just that, like, I was confused when we finished. I was like, did we have something?
It was acting, darling. It was just acting.
Yeah, but sometimes it gets really real.
No, for sure. Well, that line is not a line.
Yeah, it's true. And and that's the other thing too. I think almost every actor I've had intense moments with at work, they've stayed in my life for some reason, because it's like you hit, even though the connection is, even though the script is not real, the connection between the two souls,
for sure,
is real.
Well, yeah, you created a powerful anchor in your own shared human experience that connects you.
Yes, exactly.
Shall we go on to the next photo?
Sure. Yes, let's move
Jen,
on.
what are you doing? Like we just went straight out the gate. Boom.
I know. Well,
I love it.
I'm a lot to handle.
No, this is just right.
Okay, good.
So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.